With Royal Paladin just got a new support wave, it was just a matter of time before Shadow Paladin got one as well. And apparently it was looking at Royal Paladin's homework, because this support is looking very similar.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review, and today we're gonna dive in for the Phantasmal Steed Restoration set, and we started off with none other of Shadow Paladin, the clan of the main character of AL4 Suzuga Moriren, and it's a fan favorite, and with that also quite an expensive clan, and for this set even more so because for some reason, Bushiroad decided to drop in an additional VR for Shadow Paladin. So this set not only contains one VR as per usual, but a second one. And to make everything even worse, both VRs are for the same single deck. So yeah, get your wallets ready, because this set isn't going to be cheap at all. But at least there are going to be a lot of very interesting and good support cards, and that's what we're going to look at today. So let's jump right into this card, as there is a lot to discuss. So first off, they got additional reprint triggers just like every other clan that we got in Wave 2, and I'm just gonna give them 1 star as they are just generic reprint. However, they also did get a third crit trigger that is Grim Revenger, and luckily it does have the Revenger clause, so maybe it could work with premium kinds of stuff that works with the Revenger, so that's a nice addition. But in general, I'm gonna give it 3 stars as it's just an additional crit trigger, so in the standard variants, we at least can experiment with different trigger lineups. The next up, they also got a new starter, but that's just a generic starter, and this time it's Crisis Revenger Fritz. So once again, the Revenger name, but for standard itself, it doesn't really mean anything, so I'm gonna give it just 1 star as it's just a carbon copy of what we already have. Then for the new vanillas that Shadow Paladin is going to get, the first one is this Grid 1 Shadow Shifter Dragon, and it's the 15k shield variant. But to be honest, I don't think this has any room for Shadow Paladin at all, as it's a very aggressive force clan that tends to smack cards onto the field, attack your opponent, and then maybe in the same turn or the following turns retire them for set skills. And with the new Mordred Phantom Blaster Dark build, it's a little bit more centered about them, and maybe in the early game you want to put some pressure or do some filtering with your domains, and this really doesn't do anything. The extra shield value, you only attain that if you draw it forcefully out of your deck. There's no way to get it or whatsoever, so I'm personally only going to give it 1 star. If it was the grade 1 with intercept kind, then this would be a great addition to the deck, as you could amp up the pressure in the early game by slamming it down on the field, and then just intercept it away for some extra shield value, so you get the best of both worlds. Then for the second vanilla card that they got in this set, they get Gigantech Enforcer, and that's the 12k grade 2 variant. Overall, it's not really that amazing, but the 12k body does help it in the early game. It's also very aggressive in that kind of sense. Sadly, it doesn't have intercept shield value, so by that it has a very limited purpose. And as I stated before, with the whole thing with Mordred Phantom and Blast the Dark, those are probably your main enforcer for pressure, so this thing falls to the wayside in value, especially after you've ridden up to grade 3. So for that, I'm just gonna give it 2 stars, as it is a little bit more useful to the clan than just the 15k shield grade 1 variant. And just like every other clan, they also got a new Perfect Guard grade 1 draw drop version, and that for them is Witch of Destruction Bella. And just like all the other Perfect Guard grade 1s, I'm going to give it 3 stars, as it allows them to upgrade their grade 1 Perfect Guard so they can make room for different trigger lineups with the additional third crit. Now that we have those basic things out of the way, let's jump right into the unique card for Shadow Paladin himself. And we're going to start it off with a very interesting grade 1, that is Demon World Castle and the Fort. So Demon World Castles finally makes their return to standard, because I believe this is the first actual one in the main support. Maybe we got a promo in between, but I cannot remember on the top of my head. But this grade 1 skill is Continues to the Rigid Circle. If there are 5 cards in your opponent's damage zone, this unit gets power plus 20k. So in the very late game, this thing is going to be a 28k attacker or a potential 28k booster, and that's pretty damn strong when you combine it with your Blasted Darks. That's 10k and a couple of 10ks on top of that, but the 10 plus the 28 is a 38, which is a very high magic number. The only downside is, as you can already assume, this thing is just an 8k do nothing for like 95 or 90% of the game, because there's not a big room or margin where they are sitting at 5 damage and you can capitalize on this effect. So yeah, it can be very good in those situations, but it's actually just a win more card. And for that I'm only gonna give it 2 stars, as it isn't completely useless, but you're probably gonna want to run other cards to push them to that 5 damage, because by running this, you aren't going to do that. Next up, we got a very interesting grade 2 that is Mage of Rigor Mass, and its skill is Auto Rigor Circle. When it attacks a Vanguard, if your opponent has no rear guards, cost Counterblast 1, you draw 2 cards and retire one of your rear guards. This is a good addition to a very retire heavy strategies, like with Gust Blaster, Phantom Blaster, and Blast the Dark that retire your opponent's field. And drawing 2 cards for a Counterblast 1 is a pretty good value, as usually you only get 1 draw for 1 Counterblast. You can say, well, you need to retire one of your rear guards, so you're minus, but you can combine it with how this card works as on attack, so you can retire maybe already rested attacker or a booster that you're not going to use because you cannot restand in most cases, so you can use it like that. Or you can combine it with cards like Dark Mage Cuff Bot that calls a card from the top of your deck, and at the end of the turn you're gonna retire it anyways, so you can target it with this card so you don't actually minus at all, so it's a direct +2. That does have some value. The only downside to this card itself is that you need to have an entire empty field, and itself doesn't help with that at all. So you need to have other cards that can either punish your opponent when they call a full field, or you need to face up against an opponent that doesn't really have a field, like the new Pale Moon, for example, that removes its own field. Then this is really good against that type of clan. But against other extra clans like Gold Paladin, it might be really hard to fulfill this card's condition to actually get the +2 out of it. So for that, I'm only going to give it 2 stars, as it's very hard to make it work, especially now how Shadow Paladin is moving away from field disruption or field retire. So it might be a little bit too tough at this point. Well, we have another card that's very similar in concept, and that's a new grade 3, that is Knight of Severity Drin. And its skill is act on Vanguard to Rearguard Circle once per turn. If your opponent has 2 or less rear guards, cost Counterblast 1, draw a card, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So it's similar to the grade 2, that for the fact that you Counterblast 1 and you draw a card, so that's a +1, and in the other one it's draw 2 but you retire something, so in some cases it's still a +1. This doesn't have to retire anything, but it does gain an additional 10k. That helps with pressure, and as seen as it works on Vanguard as well as Rearguard Circle, and it does have the force marker, makes it a very useful unit in all kinds of scenarios. And even the restriction that your opponent needs to have 2 or less rear guards is a lot easier to attain, because that is a scenario that you're going to find yourself most times, especially with running Blast the Dark that can snipe one of your opponent's rear guards, and you're probably going to attack sometimes in their rear guards. So it's a lot easier to fulfill this card in most Shadow Paladin builds. So I'm going to give this one 3 stars, as it's a very solid unit with the additional draw, power, and just the condition is very easy to attain in most matches. Then we get to a series of cards that have a very similar cost and effectiveness. We have this great one that is Lacerate Crescent, and her skill is Auto on Rearguard Circle. When placed, cost Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1. Your opponent chooses one of his or her rear guards and retires all of his or her rear guards in the same column as that unit. And you might be wondering, well, that's for that cost is 2 retires. That's actually pretty decent, because Counterblast 1 is usually retire, Soul Blast 1 can also be equivalent to retire, so it's just more retire in a single card, so that's pretty effective, is something you would think. But first off, it's a 7k, so that's already a little bit bad. But then you get to the point that your opponent is choosing which unit they can retire, and then they need to retire that column. 9 out of 10 times, they're not going to give you the 2 retires, as they probably have a column where only 1 rearguard is left. So a front row unit, or maybe only a booster. So they're just going to pick that column and just let that one die instead of 2. That's what they're going to choose. And even if they have a full field, they can just pick the booster for their Vanguard, and they cannot retire the Vanguard, so that's still only a -1. So you need to pay a Counterblast and a Soul Blast, and you are not guaranteed of 2 retires and probably only 1 retire. Yeah, there are other cards that can do that better and maybe have an additional skill and at least have a better basis. So yeah, this is in my book a 1-star card that isn't good at all. And we basically have a carbon copy as a grade 2 version, and that is Gloom and Crescent, because her skill is also Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, costs Counter +1 and Soul +1. Your opponent chooses one of his Vanguards and retires all of his Vanguards in the same column as that unit. Once again, 1 star. Yes, it may have a higher base now because it's a 10k grade 2, but your grade 2s are way more valuable than your grade 1s. So running a card like this isn't great at all. So yeah, just like the grade 1, just a 1 star and nothing more. Now we get to a card which a lot of people had hoped for that it was a 5k, because it would have made a very funny pun in terms of players that play Magic the Gathering, as I'm referring to Nullity Revenger mana. And the joke is, of course, tapping the main or tapping for a mana. But sadly, she isn't 5k, she's an 8k grade 1 with the skill Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, costs Counter +1 and Soul +1. Your opponent chooses one of his Vanguards, retires it, and this unit gains power +5k until the end of turn. So it's similar to the grade 1 and the grade 2 that it is Counter +1, Soul +1, and it just outright retires 1. But in this case, it at least gains a little bit more power. This makes the card a lot better because you are given certain value instead of the grade 1 and the grade 2, where you might get a double retire, but probably in most cases only 1. This card just states, alright, you're only gonna retire 1 probably, so to compensate it, we give it 5k power, so it becomes a 13k attacker or booster, which makes it a lot more versatile. Also, because it's just an 8k body, makes it also a better value target, even if you need to ride it, and as a normal booster, it can still make magic numbers. And for that, I'm gonna give it 3 stars, and it might be a little bit high, but if you want to make a more retire focus build, this allows you to have more options. You can now put them in your grade 1 slots that are actually good. The other grade 1 with the 7k body, I wouldn't actually want to run something like that in a certain build. This looks a lot more appealing, as it can also be an aggressive attacker, as it can become a 13k on the spot if I needed to force more shield out of my opponent's hand, as well as it just opens up more room in my grade 2 lineup without sacrificing power or value in my grade 1 lineup. Then we get a bridge between a new 5k power support lineup with the Counterblast, Soul Blast skills, as we have this grade 3 that is Dubious Light of Ancestry Sessional. And her skill is Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, costs Counter +1 and Soul +1. Search your deck for up to 2 cards with power +5k. Cut onto an open Vanguard Circle and shuffle your deck. So for a Counterblast and Soul Blast, you are effectively gaining a +2 and your search amount of your deck, so you're filtering as well. This is a lot better in terms of value in the skill itself than Darkbond Trumpeter, as you can call in the main and another grade 5, and in the main is standing, so you can then immediately use the main to call out another one, so you can filter 3 cards. But there is a major downside to this card in itself, and that's because it's a grade 3, without a force marker, that is a Vanguard-centric skill. And also the problem is that sure, you can fetch out your buys and your domains, but that's on grade 3. And you actually want to start doing that on grade 1 or at the latest at grade 2 to start the value engine right there. If you're doing it on grade 3 and you're needing to ride in this thing forcefully to get that, that isn't really a good thing. That's way too late in the game to actually make some value out of it and to make a difference. With that said, this card does have some potential in the future if we get some amazing other 5k additions or other support cards for 5k power units. And this set does have a new 5k unit that is pretty decent in my eyes. It's pretty good actually in most scenarios, and it does have some value, but I don't think it's enough to make this card runnable or playable in actual decks. So for that, I'm still going to give this one 2 stars, with the notion that this could actually be a pretty decent card even though it doesn't have a force marker, because if we get pretty 6 5k power units, then this card could actually be very good. Then what it was just referring to, a new 5k power unit, and this time it's a grade 2, and it's Knight of Authority, Demna. And its skill is Auto Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, doesn't hit while attacking a Vanguard. If your opponent did not call a Guardian during that battle, costs counterblast 1 and deal 1 damage to your opponent's Vanguard. This, in my eyes, is a pretty sick 5k grade 2 unit. And right out of the bat, I want to say it's definitely, in my eyes, a 4-star card for a couple of reasons. First off, this skill removes the issue that it's a 5k power unit. You could actually make the power 0 and it doesn't really matter. But the fact that it's a 5k power means it works with the whole 5k engine. So it can be searched out with the main, it can be searched out with the new grade 3, it can also be refetched with another grade 1 that we're going to talk about after this one. So it allows it to be working with this engine. That's a gigantic plus. And also a big thing about this card is it doesn't care for your opponent's base power or defensive triggers, as it's just gonna attack. And if your opponent is saying, well, it can't hit my normal, so I'm just gonna no guard, well, then you can activate the skill and still do a damage. Then your opponent is like, alright, I need to guard it. So either this card gains a lot of power through force or power and they are forced to guard it actually, or you're just hitting under their power and your opponent is forced to at least call a card from hand. They can't intercept it because that's not a call. They need to go -1 from hand, or they need to use a special kind of guardian skill that they can maybe call guard from the drop zone or guard from the damage zone, depending if they run those cards, but they're still wasting shield value on an attack that they shouldn't. And even if they get defense trigger, you're still gonna force a card. And sure, you can say, well, they aren't forced because you need to pay a counterblast. Well, no, because your opponent is never gonna take the bet that, oh, you know what, maybe he's not gonna pay the counterblast to deal me damage. Nobody's gonna take that bet. I mean, whenever my opponent is saying, well, I'm gonna risk it and I'm not gonna guard, are you gonna pay the counterblast? You hell sure am I going to pay the counterblast to deal your damage. So, with that in mind, everybody is going to at least put a card from hand to the Guardian Circle to prevent that free damage. That is for me reasons enough to give this card 4 stars, as it just is a good aggressive tool in the early game. It can help you in late game scenarios as well, as you can always put the power on your other attacks. You can just focus your centric power with force markers, triggers, and all that kind of stuff on your Vanguard and your other column, and this thing can just be 5k and still force a card from your opponent's hand. And if those cards already have guard restriction on them, this will make it even more annoying for them to deal with it, because they are forced to use even more of a shield from hand to guard against a free damage as well. Then next up we have the last new support card for 5k powers, and that's this grade 1, Cool Bow. And its skill is act on rearguard circle, cost, rest 2 rearguards in the same column as this unit, and return a 5k power normal unit from your drop zone to your hand. An important thing about this card is that it states a normal unit. So you cannot put triggers in your hand for extra shield value, as all triggers are 5k power at this point. So it's just fetching cards like Nemain, Swordbreaker, or Demna that we just talked about. And yes, you need to rest 2 rearguard, so you're resting an entire column, so you're removing that attack. But if you have a card like Demna, you don't care that you rested a column, because you can then fetch it back to hand and call it on top of one of the rested units, and you still get some value out of it, because that unit can still hit, as it doesn't matter for the power of your opponent's number. So it's still a valuable attack that you're getting out of it, and it doesn't cost you counterblast, and that's the major thing, that it actually doesn't cost you resources. Also, if we have other cards that work in the main phase that sacrifices units, you can even get more value out of them, as you can rest them for this skill, then use them as sacrifice fodder for other skills, then call the new grade 2 5k power or the grade 1 5k power unit that you fetch back to the field, which had just been opened up thanks to your other skills. So there is a good synergy, and the more 5k power units that we're going to get, this card is only going to be better. So for that, I'm going to give it 3 stars at this point, as it is a solid engine tool card that can work its wonders for these future cards that we're probably going to get in each and every single support wave. But with that out of the way, let's take a look at a new duo for Shadow Paladin that's all about putting pressure, but mostly another advantage engine for draw power, as they are working quite effectively together, and with how they work, that's pretty cost efficient if you ask me. And I'm talking about the new Revengers. That is Frontline Revenger Claudius, the grade 1, and its skill is auto on rearguard circle. At the end of your turn, if your Vanguard is a grade 3, cost counterblast 1 and put this unit into your soul and draw a card. If you have a Barrier Troop Revenger Dorint on your Vanguard circle or rearguard circle, counter charge 1. Ironically, Dorint is a grade 2, so you can't not really actually fulfill the condition of having grade 3 Vanguard to then gain the counter charge, so I'm very confused why they put it on the card. But basically when we take a look at the skill, for a counterblast, you gain a soul and you draw a card. But you do -1 on your units because the unit goes to the soul. However, if we have the other unit onto the field, you gain a counter charge back. So actually, you trade in a unit onto the field for another card in your hand, as well as gaining a soul. And soul is always very important for Shadow Paladin, as they have a lot of skills that uses it, and not a lot that generates it. So that has actual value in it itself. But the main thing comes when we take a look at the other grade 2 that works together with Claudius, and that is Barrier Troop Revenger Dorint, and its skill is Auto Revenger Circle. When placed, costs Counter +1 and Soul +1, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. If you have Frontline Revenger clause on the Vanguard Circle, Rearguard Circle, draw a card. So what you want to do is put the grade 1 onto the field, then place this one for a counterblast Soul Blast. That column will change from an 80k to a 28k. You draw one card at that point, and then at the end of the turn, you counterblast one again, put the one into the soul, then draw another card, and you countercharge one. So if you add up all those costs, you basically come around to one counterblast and one unit for 2 cards in hand. I actually think that's a pretty decent effect. Gaining 2 cards in hand for 1 counterblast and a specific unit removed isn't really that bad of a trade-off, while also having a 28k column for that turn itself. I think that's a pretty decent draw engine, as both cards draw 2 cards, and the cost efficiency only for 1 counterblast and a card on the field itself is actually pretty decent. For most of Shadow Paladin's cards are counter +1, draw a card, or recycle a card onto the field by calling something, drawing something, calling something, drawing something. This is a little bit different, but it has the same value. But if you combine it together, you actually get a plus out of it, and that's pretty big if you ask me. Also, generating the 28k column is nothing to sneeze at the same time. Sure, it's a 2-card combo, so it might be a little bit hard to pull off in some scenarios, but the value and the actual thing that you're going to get out of them is pretty high. And for that, I'm going to give both cards 4 stars, as they are very powerful when you get that scenario off. And with the other Psycho Engine and filtering that we have in Shadow Paladin with the main and the other cards that can draw, you have a high success rate with these 2 cards. Now, with all those cards out of the way, let's take a look at the main support line for this new set. And although there are only 4 cards, they are going to establish a complete new deck for Shadow Paladin that is somewhat similar to the Royal Paladin Ganslot Blaster Blade build. And we're going to start off with a new grade 1 that is Transient Revenger Masquerade. And its skill is act on Rearguard Circle, cost counterblast 1, and put this unit into your soul. Call a Blaster Dark from your drop zone to the Rearguard Circle, and that unit gains power plus 5k until the end of turn. So Blaster Dark now has some recursion onto the field, and it gains an additional power, making it possible to achieve 23k columns. So that's already pretty big, but the fact that this card goes to the soul instead of retiring makes it even better. As I just stated earlier in the video, soul is very important, and gaining more soul is all the better. So this is a very good skill. But then we get an additional bonus to the card, and that's Continuous Rearguard Circle. During the battle it boosted, this unit gets power plus 3k, so it's an 11k booster. In the early game, you can make some very potent numbers with that, so this is going to be a very valuable card and asset to the new deck, especially with the recursion of Blaster Dark, as you're going to need that a lot with the upcoming VR and that mechanic, as you're going to see in a second. So without a doubt, this is a 5-star card, as it can also still be used outside of this new deck, as a lot of Shadow Paladin decks are going to run Blaster Dark anyways, and they're going to need a lot of soul, so you can even run it as a support card for just an average Shadow Paladin deck as well. Then next up, we've got the grade 2 Masquerade, and this is also the second VR for Shadow Paladin, and that is Nullity Revenger Masquerade. And its skills are Auto and Vanguard to Rearguard Circle. When placed, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 Illusionary Revenger Mordred Phantom or Blaster Dark from among them, and put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. If you put a card into your hand, retire one of your rear guards. This is an excellent consistency booster to the new deck, as you're completely revolving around having Mordred Phantom as your Vanguard and having Blaster Darks on your rearguard circle for the pressure. This card allows you to do that more consistently, and that's something you actually need for the build to make it viable. Otherwise, you're just running a very high RNG build. And the fact that you need to retire something isn't really that bad, as we already discussed with the cool bow that need to rest 2 units. You can just sack one of those rested units because you're not going to use them anyways. You can also sack one of your domains if you're starting to use domain in the early game, as they're just kill fodder in most scenarios, so you can do that. And just in the worst case scenario, you need to retire itself, but basically changing this card into a Blasted Arc or changing that card into a Mordred Phantom is a win in an overall basis for the deck, as you just progressing your game state and you don't mind that sacrifice. But if you don't have to sacrifice him, he got his second ability to make him a little bit more useful, and that's Continuous of Vanguard and Rearguard Circle. During the battle it attacked a Vanguard, this unit gets power plus 3k. So it's a 13k attacker, so it can be a solid beater. And with the skill also being on Vanguard Circle, if you ride this thing on your grade 2 and you didn't have a good early game and you do fetch one of those cards, you actually get a plus out of it. So it does compensate if your early game is pretty weak with that added bonus in itself. So you at least have something like that as added onto the card. And with all those pluses, I cannot say anything less than just 4 stars. As yes, you could say 5 stars, but because it's very limited in use that it only works for this specific build, I think when we're going to move away, this is one of the first cards that's going to be dropped. The grade 1 I think is going to be used a little bit more because it generates soul, it has more recursion onto the field, and it's an excellent booster. I think it has more room to be played. And speaking of trip Rs, there's the last trip R of this set that we haven't talked about, and this thing is a beast. And I'm referring to Danger Lunge Dragon, this new grade 3. And it's insane because its skills are Auto and Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost Soul Blast 1 and return a grade 2 from your drop zone to your hand. Basically, when you ride this thing, you Soul Blast the grade 2 that was on your Vanguard the previous turn and you get it back to hand. You need your Blasted Arcs, but if you want to ride Blasted Arc onto turn 2 for the extra drive check, you can do that and then fetch it back to hand with this skill. This also means that the Soul Blast cost isn't actually a cost because you're actually moving a card from your soul to your hand in that scenario. But if you've ridden into Masquerade, for example, you can use Masquerade, maybe get a +1, and then get the Masquerade to hand and use Masquerade once again to filter your deck even more. That's also an option that you can use. So this card has some good valid targets if you are forced to ride into this thing. And as you're going to see with Mordred Phantom, you actually don't mind riding into this thing as a first grade 3, as you have some way to play around that. But it also has a second ability that's Auto on Vanguard Circle and Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, if you have 3 or more force markers, cost Soul Blast 1 grade 3, until the end of the battle, this unit gets power plus 10k, critical +1, and your opponent cannot call Sentinels from hand. Yes, this is actually a waterfall on the Rearguard Circle as well as Vanguard Circle. The only differences between this and waterfall is that you need to have 3 force markers onto the field to be able to use this skill. But that isn't going to be a problem for the new deck at all. But even if we don't look at the new deck and just look at it as its own, it's not really that bad to have that restriction, as by having 3 force markers, that means you have to be ridden 3 times. And in Waterfall's case, the earliest that you're going to do is by second ride, because you also need to Soul Blast the grade 3, meaning you have 2 force markers. This is going to be a turn later. So you might say that's weaker, but if you call to the Rearguard Circle at that time, you don't have to keep rewriting himself to be able to use the skill. It can stay on the Rearguard Circle and you just ride your Vanguard with any type of grade 3. You don't matter for what it is, because you can still use its skill. As long as your new grade 3 has a force marker, you're going to progress the pressure of this card. And this is going to be a very deadly card for Shadow Paladin in general, as you can use it in all kinds of builds. But it's going to be even more deadlier with the new build, as you can accelerate force markers as early as your first grade 3, and this thing can be live at that stage if you manage to soul charge a grade 3 as well. So yeah, this thing can be nuts for the new build, and it's definitely a 5-star card in my mind, as it's insane for the new build, but also for the clan in general. It can be used in a lot of scenarios and for a lot of builds, and I think it's going to be a staple for quite some time for a lot of Shadow Paladin decks. But now it's time to take a look at the final unit of the deck and the final unit of the support wave for Shadow Paladin, their main VR, that is Illusionary Revenger Mordred the Phantom. And its skills are Auto and Vanguard Circle. When your Blaster Dark is placed on Rearguard Circle, you get an imaginary gift force. And this is what I meant by you need to recurve your Blaster Darks onto the field as much as possible. You need to filter for them as soon as possible. And that Danger Lunge skill isn't going to be very hard to achieve in a new build, as you're going to accelerate a lot of force markers very quickly. But then we can take a look at the second ability, and this is where you're going to see why it's not really that bad to ride Danger Lunge as a first grade 3, as its second ability is Auto and Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, if your opponent's Vanguard is a grade 3 or greater, cost counter +1, stand all of your Blaster Darks, and they gain power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this card is live once you went into your grade 3 if you went second. So your opponent's already at grade 3. If you went first, this is going to be live this second time around. You don't have to rewrite. As long as your opponent is going to go into the grade 3, you can use this skill. So if you went first, riding into Danger Lunge, that isn't really that terrible, as you can use its Vanguard skill to gain more value out of your cards, and you can press your advance like that. But you can also just go into more the Phantom and just call some Blaster Darks and gain force markers while you're at it, as that skill is still live at that point. As you can see, this card is looking very similar to Ganslot, as it empowers your Blaster Darks, just like Ganslot does with Blaster Blade. The only difference is, and why I think the first skill is miles better than the Royal Paladin part, is that Royal Paladin only gives a 10k to the Blaster Blades at that point. When they are removed, it's gone. These Blaster Darks aren't going to get the actual 10k, you're going to put them onto the force markers, onto the circles themselves, meaning if the Blaster Darks are removed and you don't have anything left, you're still retaining the power. So if you're gonna call something else, it will gain that 10k power increase. And if you're gonna call multiple times of these Blaster Darks, thanks to cards like Transient Revenger, Masquerade, you can have something like 7-8 force markers onto those circles, and then you can call a trigger, and the trigger is suddenly 85k. Yeah, that's not gonna happen with Ganslot. That's where Mordred's at. And also the second ability with the restand and the additional 10k means that hitting defensive triggers won't matter, because they get the extra 10k to pump up over those defensive triggers. So that's pretty insane. But combine that with Danger Lunge, that can then swing in with a waterfall attack for maybe 70-80k with the crit and with the Sentinel Restrict. Yeah. You can say that that's your end game. That's pretty damn insane. And for that, I'm definitely going to give this card 5 stars, as it's super aggressive. This card is so insane in raw value. But the major downside to this build is, unlike Royal Paladin, they don't have 100% accurate consistency. Where Royal Paladin can just blatantly grab a Blaster Dark from their deck and just slam it into their hand or slam it onto the board, Shadow Paladin cannot do something like that. They only can fetch Blaster Dark directly from the drop zone, and in terms of their deck, they only have Nullity Revenger Masquerade that can check top 7. And I have seen it many times before that it isn't in the top 7, and they do not get their Blaster Darks at all. So when things are going to go in your way, this is probably an unstoppable force. It is going to be very tough to survive this kind of onslaught, but you need to have some luck on your side. But thanks to the new VRs and the support cards, this is going to be a very solid deck. And that is also where I want to end the video. As we've seen, there are some amazing support cards that we got for Shadow Paladin. A lot of powerful new cards in general. Also some interesting new support for the 5k power units, as well as the entire new deck for Blaster Dark, together with Illusionary Revenger, Mordred, Phantom. So very good stuff for Shadow Paladin in general. But with that said, I'm very curious of what you guys think of this new support, as this is, just like the Royal Paladin side, a very interesting approach to the deck. We are straying away from what they are generally doing, especially with Shadow Paladin even more than Royal Paladin. So I'm very curious what your opinion is about this new support set and the way that they're approaching Shadow Paladin with this whole Blaster Dark focus centric playstyle, and not so much on either field disruption or self-retiring and that kind of stuff. It's more about just outright pressure and just by killing them over by doing that. So I'm very curious what your thoughts and opinions is about those cards. And if you're interested about the other set reviews for the other clans in this set, then hit the subscribe button and the bell button to be updated, because those videos are going to be live in the next coming days. But in the meantime, I want to thank my Patreon supporters for making this video and everything happening on the channel possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel, then just like I said, subscribe to the channel, hitting the bell button to be updated for future videos, liking the video, or sharing it with all your Vanguard playing Cardfight friends. But if you want to support us a little bit more directly, you can go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timely, and I see you guys in the next one.